Chapter 17. The Burn. The slick, almost feverish heat of Nocturne still coated my skin, a greasy film of sweat and stage lights that lingered even as I stumbled through the side door and into the stark backstage corridor. The concrete walls, rough and cool against the back through my thin shirt, sent a shiver that wasn't entirely unpleasant through me. A stark contrast to the club's humid embrace, raising goosebumps that felt almost like tiny pinpricks of awareness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, each beat echoing the panicked rhythm in my chest. Breath hitched in my throat, a strangled gasp that tasted of stale perfume and rising fear, catching like a sob I refused to release. Dampness bloomed on my palms as I leaned against the unforgiving wall, the cool solidity, a small anchor in the swirling chaos. The muffled throb of the bass, once a vibrant pulse I moved with, now vibrated through my body like a malevolent tremor, resonating deep in my bones. Him. The thought slammed against the walls of my mind, a brutal intrusion. Here. How could he be here? Initial shock, a cold wave that washed over me, receded, leaving behind a residue of icy dread, a clenching in my gut that felt like a physical blow. Then, the heat. White hot. Furious. How dare he? The violation felt intimate, a tearing of the fragile trust I'd cautiously offered, like a hand reaching under my skin. He wasn't just another faceless gaze in the dimly lit crowd. He was Julian Stonewall, the one who knew a sliver of the real Elena, beneath the carefully constructed persona. The one I'd allowed a glimpse behind the curtain during our confrontation at Veridian. Had he followed me? The question clawed at me, sharp and insistent. How much had he seen? The deliberate sway of my hips? The practiced allure in my eyes? The subtle tremor in my hands as I worked the room? Did he even begin to comprehend the intricate web of obligation that held me captive? Panic, a tight knot in my stomach, twisted with the burning acid of fury, a bitter taste rising in my throat. Fear for myself, the potential exposure, the brutal consequences from the Veridian Ballet Company if my secret job was unveiled. A blur of hurried movement caught my eye. Another dancer, face streaked with smudged coal, the whites of her eyes stark against the smeared black, smelling sharply of sweat and the cloying sweetness of clove cigarettes, brushed past without a word, her own private storm etched on her features, her hurried steps echoing on the concrete floor. The harsh, fluorescent lighting of the corridor was a brutal assault after the artful gloom of the main room, revealing the peeling paint and the stained linoleum, the grime that clung to the corners. A gruff voice barked an unintelligible order further down the hall, the sound grating against my already frayed nerves. I pushed myself away from the wall, the rough concrete grazing my skin, a grounding sensation, the coolness, a momentary reprieve. I needed the anonymity of the dressing room, the temporary sanctuary of the other women, the familiar chaos, a strange comfort. The air here was thick with the unglamorous reality of my profession, the acrid tang of burnt hairspray clinging to the air like a suffocating film, the stale undertones of old sweat clinging to the fabric partitions, the medicinal scent of cheap disinfectant struggling to mask the lingering perfume, a stark contrast to the intoxicating, deliberately crafted atmosphere Julian had witnessed. In the relative quiet of the cramped dressing room, momentarily empty save for the rustle of discarded costumes hanging limply on their racks, the image of Julian, illuminated by the club's hazy light, his features had been sharp, his expression unreadable. I tried to dissect it, to categorize it, to find some logical explanation for his presence. Was it mere detached observation, the curiosity of a patron, or something more? A weight, an intensity that had settled on me like a tangible thing, a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. Had I imagined the flicker in his eyes, something that had felt disturbingly like concern? Or was it judgment, a silent condemnation of what he'd seen, a disapproval that stung more than I cared to admit? The memory of his stillness, his unwavering focus on me as I moved through the club, felt both deeply intrusive, a violation of my carefully constructed barrier, and strangely magnetic. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a visceral response to being so thoroughly seen. Beneath the anger, a confusing stirring in my lower abdomen, a betraying warmth that I instantly suppressed, a furious denial of any attraction to the man who was uncovering my secrets one by one. Forced deep breaths shuddered through me, a desperate attempt to quell the frantic energy thrumming beneath my skin. I reached for my makeup bag, the cool plastic a small comfort in my trembling hands. Reapplying my composure was a physical act, each stroke of foundation, a layer of defense against the rawness I felt, a deliberate attempt to erase the vulnerability he had witnessed. The cool, slick cream slid over my still-heated cheeks, a temporary balm, a superficial shield. The night wasn't over. I had 3 more performances, plus the mingling with the patrons that was required off stage. I needed to reset myself, to appear in control. As I changed back into my costume, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror. I saw a pale face, the pupils of my wide eyes still dilated with shock, betraying the inner turmoil I desperately tried to conceal. With precise movements, I smoothed stray strands of hair, adjusted the neckline of my leotard, a tactile attempt to regain control over my physical presentation, the outward shell that protected the vulnerable core. A hard resolve settled in my shoulders, a physical bracing against the storm within, my jaw clenching with determination. I needed to get out there, to finish my shift. And then, once ensconced in the relative safety of my apartment, I would figure out how to handle Julian, this unwelcome intrusion, into my carefully compartmentalized life. Several hours later, the end-of-night ritual was a practiced shedding. I stripped off the shimmering skin I wore, the weight of it feeling suddenly obscene, the glittery fabric rough against my sensitized skin. Underneath, my own clothes felt too ordinary, too exposed, offering little protection against the lingering feeling of being watched. I scrubbed at my face with rough cloths and cold cream, erasing the carefully painted allure, the mask that had held his gaze. Most of the makeup came away in gray smears, but a faint shadow of it seemed to linger around my eyes, a ghostly reminder of the woman he'd watched, the woman I became under the lights. I avoided the tired eyes of the other dancers, their shared exhaustion, a silent understanding I didn't want to partake in tonight, their knowing glances feeling like accusations. A brief clipped exchange with Lars, one of the owners, near the back exit. His eyes flicked over me, a familiar calculating assessment. I offered the requisite professional deference, a slight dip of my head, while inside, my stomach churned with a toxic mix of fear and resentment. I didn't know much about the 3 owners of Nocturne, Damien, Gunnar, and Lars. They were cool, aloof, mysterious, and intimidating. They also must be very wealthy, based on how popular the club was, and how elite the clientele. The familiar weight of exhaustion settled in my limbs, a leaden drag that usually signaled the end of a long night, but tonight it felt different, heavier, tainted by his presence, the weariness seeping into my bones. Stepping out into the cool, damp night air from the concealed alley exit was like shedding a suffocating skin. A momentary gasp of freedom, quickly choked by anxiety. Goosebumps prickled my arms immediately, a response to the sudden chill and the slick humidity that clung to the brick walls, each tiny bump a point of heightened awareness. The alley reeked of overflowing bins and the metallic tang of recent rain, a sharp, unpleasant odor that clung to the back of my throat. It was a rare evening where I was the only Veridian dancer performing. I was alone, vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to writhe, to hold a potential watcher, every rustle of discarded trash sounding like approaching footsteps. Was he still out there? The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me, a cold fist clenching in my chest. My senses were screamingly alert, every nerve ending taut, vibrating with a nervous energy. The distant scuff of a footstep down the street made my breath catch in my throat. A visceral reaction of pure fear, my heart leaping into my throat. Car headlights turning a corner cast long, distorted shapes that danced like menacing figures, illuminating the slick, black pavement. The city's ambient noise, the low hum of traffic, a distant siren wailing in the night, usually a comforting backdrop, now felt sharp, intrusive, amplifying the silence around me. The tension in my shoulders radiated down my spine, a tight coil of anxiety that made my neck ache, my jaw clenched. I clutched my bag tightly against my side. The worn leather, a small comfort, my knuckles white, my fingers digging into the strap. The slickness of the rain on the pavement reflected the harsh glare of the streetlights, creating an almost voyeuristic gleam, as if the city itself was watching me, exposed and vulnerable. The subway wasn't far, a few blocks. Adam usually picked us up, but I told him not to bother when he dropped me off. I wouldn't be able to split the fare with anyone, and I needed to save every penny for Friday. Friday. What was I going to do? I meant to ask one of the owners for a loan or advance or something, but my mind had been so scrambled I had forgotten. The encounter replayed in fragmented loops. Julian's face in the dim light, the unsettling intensity of his gaze, the way he'd simply been there, a solid, unwelcome presence in my carefully constructed world. Then the performance itself, the practiced smiles and seductive movements now feeling tainted, somehow exposed and cheapened by his unwelcome witness. A blush rising on my neck at the memory. An internal argument raged within me, a frantic, whispered debate. Find him, confront him, tear into him with the fury that still simmered beneath my fear, unleash the torrent of accusations that clawed at my throat, beg him not to say anything, or pretend I'd never seen him, try to bury the unsettling encounter, and hope he disappeared back into whatever oblivious world he inhabited. The impossibility of ignoring it was a cold certainty that settled deep within me, a leaden weight in my stomach. The cold knot of fear in my belly tightened with each block I walked, a physical ache that mirrored the growing dread in my chest. Fragmented images of Julian, the set of his jaw, the unwavering look in his eyes, the way his gaze had lingered on my body, flashed in my mind, triggering an unwelcome flutter low in my abdomen, a confusing undercurrent of something that felt dangerously close to curiosity, battling with the fear and anger that should have been my only response. The subway entrance came into view. Its underground warmth, usually a siren call in the late-night cold, felt different tonight. Charged, somehow electric. The usual sounds, the distant hum of late-night traffic, the mournful yowl of a cat somewhere down the block, the gentle howl of the wind, did little to soothe the unease that had settled in my chest, each familiar sound now laced with a hint of paranoia. A false sense of security flickered as I neared the steps. I descended into the brightly lit station, which felt like the final stretch of a gauntlet, the last few feet before I could collapse onto the train. Head down, weary to my bones but wired with a nervous energy that kept my muscles tense. At the turnstiles, I fumbled in my bag for my subway pass. The rustling in the quiet station seemed amplified, each tiny sound echoed in the cavernous space. My fingers brushed against my wallet, feeling clumsy, exposed under the streetlights, each fumble increasing my vulnerability. Just as my fingers secured their goal, a figure appeared. My breath hitched, a strangled sound caught in my throat, a silent scream trapped within. Adrenaline surged, a jolt of pure, primal fear that made my vision tunnel. It was him. Julian, standing there, utterly still, waiting, a silent sentinel in the night. His silhouette was stark against the orange glow of the streetlight behind him, unexpectedly imposing, even in a terrifying, unwelcome way. Alluring in its stillness, a dark, magnetic presence. The sudden rush of adrenaline made my heart pound even harder than it had backstage, a frantic drum against my ribs, echoing the frantic beat in my temples. There was no polite preamble, no hesitant greeting, no attempt at casual conversation. Just raw, immediate confrontation, the dam of my carefully controlled composure breaking. My voice, low and shaking, was laced with a fury that felt dangerously close to breaking into sobs. "What the hell are you doing here?" The words tore from my throat, sharp and accusatory, the sound harsh in the quiet street. "You followed me. After everything I told you." Accusations tumbled out, a torrent of disbelief and rage. Spying, betrayal, stupidity. Each word felt like a physical blow, a desperate attempt to push him away with the force of my anger. The feeling of being cornered, exposed like this, was intensely physical, as if the very air around us was pressing in, suffocating me, stealing the air from my lungs. Beneath the fury, I felt a tremor of something else, a desperate vulnerability laid bare by his unwanted presence, a raw exposure that made my skin prickle. His calm demeanor, a stark contrast to my unraveling fury, only infuriated me more. His quiet stillness a deliberate counterpoint to my frantic energy. He hadn't even flinched at my outburst, his expression unreadable in the dim light. His justifications, a murmured word about concern, something vague about following leads, his voice low and steady, sounded like calculated lies, manipulations designed to worm his way further into my life, to excuse his inexcusable behavior. You think this is a game? I spat, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, the words laced with venom. Fear, sharp and cold, honed the edges of my anger, a chilling premonition of the consequences. Friday. Fear of what he now knew, what he might inadvertently trigger, the delicate balance he'd so carelessly disrupted, the potential for everything to come crashing down around me. I gestured wildly, my hands trembling, the frantic energy of my body betraying the terror that coiled in my gut, the gestures sharp and uncontrolled. I tried to push past him, a desperate, almost animalistic urge to reach the turnstile, to shut him out, to pretend this wasn't happening, my shoulder bumping against his solid frame. His infuriatingly composed presence felt like a deliberate power play, a silent assertion that he wouldn't be dismissed, that he had a right to be here. "Let me give you a ride home," he whispered, his voice a low, persuasive caress that seemed to bypass my defenses. Suddenly, the fight drained out of me, leaving behind a hollow weariness that settled deep in my bones. The adrenaline that had fueled my anger evaporated, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He knew about Nocturne. The implications of that knowledge crashed down on me, heavy and suffocating. He could expose me, get me fired from Veridian, and the thought of that precarious future sent a wave of panic through me. Tears pricked at my eyes, blurring the already indistinct city lights. I allowed him to guide me back up the steps, each movement heavy and defeated, out of the station toward his waiting car. I was dazed, disconnected from my own body. I let him buckle me in, the click of the seatbelt, a final act of surrender, before he wordlessly made his way to the driver's side. He started the car without saying a word, the engine's hum, a monotonous drone that matched the dull ache in my head. The silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. Julian drove with a focused intensity, his hands gripping the wheel, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. But I could feel his attention on me, a palpable tension in the air between us. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and even, a stark contrast to the ragged breaths I was trying to control. "Elena," he said, my name sounding different on his lips, carrying a weight I couldn't quite decipher. "I understand you're angry, but there's something happening at Veridian, something that goes beyond typical financial irregularities. The pressure on the dancers, the consistent late nights, the connection to Nocturne. Is there something happening? Something that's putting you under immense pressure? The secrecy, the fear in your eyes. Is it connected to Nocturne?" I launched into a desperate litany of warnings, trying to make him understand the gravity of the situation, the perilous tightrope I walked every night. "You don't understand," I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper, my eyes darting nervously around the car, as if the very air could be listening. "This isn't about Nocturne. It's someone else, someone who knows things, someone who could destroy everything." I emphasized the control this blackmailer wielded, the hidden leverage they had, the intricate web of deceit I was trapped in. My words were laced with a raw urgency, a plea that betrayed the true vulnerability of my situation, the precarious balance I maintained. My voice cracked with a tremor of fear, a glimpse behind the carefully constructed mask. He countered, his tone still calm, infuriatingly reasonable, as if we were discussing the traffic instead of the potential destruction of my life. He spoke of concern, of wanting to help, his words laced with a stubborn insistence that grated on my nerves. But his words felt like a violation of my carefully guarded secrets, an intrusion into the one part of my life I kept fiercely separate. Each detail he mentioned, the way I flinch at certain phone calls, the guarded way I speak about my evenings, the haunted look in my eyes when I think no one is watching, confirmed how much he had observed, how deeply he had penetrated my carefully constructed facade. Every word he spoke felt like a step closer than I wanted him to be, chipping away at the walls I had built around myself, exposing the raw nerves beneath. It was as if he was deliberately dismantling my defenses, one carefully chosen phrase at a time. A maelstrom of conflicting emotions raged within me, a tempest that threatened to tear me apart. The anger was real, a burning, protective fury fueled by fear and betrayal, a desperate desire to lash out and protect myself from the intrusion, from the violation. But beneath it, other, more confusing, more dangerous things stirred. The memory of his intense focus on me, a gaze that had felt both intrusive and electrifying, a strange heat blooming in my core at the recollection. The undeniable fact that he was genuinely concerned, even if his actions were misguided and reckless. A grudging awareness of his quiet strength, the way he stood his ground despite my fury, the solidity of his presence in the chaos of my night. This internal conflict manifested in a confusing jumble of physical sensations, my body betraying the carefully controlled narrative I tried to maintain. My cheeks felt hot, a heat that had nothing to do with the air blowing from the vents, a flush of anger mixed with an unwelcome heat of something else, a warmth that spread through my neck and chest. An unexpected flutter in my chest, a traitorous response to the memory of his focused gaze, warred with the frantic pounding of my heart, a confusing rhythm of attraction and fear. And then there was that other, unnamed feeling, a strange pull low in my abdomen, a flicker of something dangerously close to forbidden curiosity, a treacherous warmth that spread through my limbs, a response I refused to acknowledge. Then, he reached out, his hand hovering near mine on the console, closing the already narrow space between us, invading my personal space with a deliberate intention. It felt like an encroachment, a violation of my carefully guarded boundaries, an almost claustrophobic intimacy that made it hard to breathe. I had to turn my head to meet his gaze, feeling trapped and strangely compelled, a dangerous pull that defied my reason. In my anger and fear, the relentless pressure of the situation finally cracked the carefully constructed composure I wore like armor. The facade of control faltered, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability that I couldn't contain. My voice trembled slightly as I spoke, a fleeting softness in my eyes betraying the terror that lurked beneath the surface, the carefully guarded secret I tried so hard to protect. My shoulders slumped momentarily, the weight of the night and the constant threat I lived under pressing down on me, the exhaustion seeping into my bones. "You don't understand," I whispered, the words a raw, almost involuntary admission, a plea for understanding that I immediately regretted. "This isn't about some club. It's someone who knows things about me. Things they could use to ruin me. They're capable of anything at all." The admission hung in the air, a fragile truth exposed in the confined space of the car, a glimpse into the darkness of my world. The argument reached an impasse, our words circling back on themselves, neither of us willing to yield. Words seemed to fail us, inadequate to express the complex tangle of emotions that bound us together, the dangerous dance we were engaged in. The air was thick with unresolved tension, anger, fear, and that powerful, frightening magnetic pull between us that had been simmering since his office, now amplified by the close proximity and the shared danger, the dangerous undercurrent of attraction that threatened to pull us under. It felt like a physical ache, a pressure building in the space between us, a taut string stretched to its breaking point. Then, his hand moved, a hesitant extension that seemed to hover near mine on the console. Was it to steady me? To stop me from pulling away? To grasp my hand and force me to listen? I couldn't be sure. But the anticipation of the touch, the possibility of physical contact, sent a shockwave through me, a confusing mix of fear and a dangerous, undeniable curiosity that threatened to overwhelm my better judgment. The air crackled with unspoken desire. His fingers finally made contact, brushing the back of my hand with a hesitant feather lightness that belied the strength I knew he possessed. The remaining space between us shattered, the invisible barrier finally breached. The shock of it was immediate, visceral, a jolt that went straight to my core. The heat of his skin, surprisingly warm against my still-chilled skin, the texture of his hand, rough yet strangely gentle, sent a tremor through me, a low current that made my muscles twitch. My instinct screamed to pull away, to recoil from this unwanted intimacy, to reassert control. But my muscles seemed to have seized, locked in place by a confusing mix of fear and a burgeoning desire I couldn't quite name. I froze, my gaze lifting to his, locking onto the turbulent depths of his eyes in the dim light of the dashboard. The conflict I saw there mirrored the chaos within me, a battle between concern and something darker, more primal, a mirroring of my own fear and the unwelcome flicker of something else, something that felt dangerously close to surrender. My breath caught again, a shallow, uneven thing, a gasp in the confined space of the car. My body, betraying my fear and anger, responded with a surge of awareness, every nerve ending suddenly hyper-alert to the feel of his touch, the warmth of his skin, the scent of him, the weight of his gaze. The anger that had been burning in my eyes, a desperate attempt to maintain control, met the raw intensity in his, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous game we were playing. It was a collision of wills, a precarious balance between resistance and surrender. Abruptly, the fight seemed to drain away, replaced by a heavy, overwhelming awareness, a surrender to the inevitable. The sounds of the city, the distant traffic, the faint murmur of voices outside the car, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers, seemed to recede, fading into a muffled background hum, as if the world outside our small, charged space ceased to exist. All my focus narrowed, compressing into the small space between us, the heat radiating from his hand on mine, the frantic pulse in my veins, the ragged rhythm of my own breathing echoing in the confined space. A stark reminder of the physical tension that gripped us as we pulled up to my building. The familiar facade felt both like a refuge and a trap. Julian parked the car, the engine's hum dying into a heavy silence. The air inside felt thick with unspoken words, with the residue of our argument and the dangerous undercurrent of attraction that had surged between us. He turned to me, his gaze intense in the dim light of the street lamp. "Elena," he began, his voice low and serious, "I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want to understand what's happening. This fear you carry, it's real, and I can't just walk away knowing you're in danger." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him to mind his own business, to leave me alone with my secrets. But the exhaustion had returned, a heavy weight in my limbs, and the raw vulnerability he'd chipped away at made it hard to maintain my anger. We got out of the car, the cool night air, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere inside. He walked me to the stoop, the silence between us charged with the unspoken, "What now?" At the foot of the steps, I stopped, my hand clutching my bag. "You can't help me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with. This isn't some equation you can solve." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out, then hesitating. The anticipation of his touch sent a shiver through me. "Maybe not," he conceded, his gaze searching mine. "But I can't just ignore what I see. And I can't ignore this." His eyes flickered down to my lips, a silent reminder of the almost kiss, the dangerous pull between us. The air crackled with unspoken desire, a potent mix of fear and something more, something that felt dangerously close to surrender. I wanted to step away, to put distance between us, to escape the intensity of his gaze. But my feet seemed rooted to the spot. "Just be careful," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. "Please." He nodded, his gaze still locked on mine. "I will, but you need to be careful too, Elena." He took another step closer, closing the space between us. The scent of him, clean and intoxicating, filled my senses. The temptation to reach out, to close the gap, was almost overwhelming. A sudden, terrifying vulnerability washed over me. The carefully constructed walls I'd built around myself, brick by fragile brick, crumbling under the weight of his presence, the exposure making my skin prickle. A raw, almost desperate need seemed to rise from somewhere deep within, eclipsing the fear and anger that had consumed me moments before, a dangerous yearning that threatened to override my reason. Who moved first? It felt inevitable, a collision that had been brewing since our eyes first met across the crowded expanse of Nocturne, a dangerous dance we'd been circling for days. His breath ghosted across my lips an instant before his mouth came down on mine. rough and desperate, fueled by the storm of emotions that had just raged between us. A desperate grasping for something real in the chaos. It wasn't gentle, wasn't romantic, not in the traditional sense. It was consuming, a raw claiming, a desperate exploration. The taste of him was a surprising mix of the night air, cool and crisp, and a faint lingering bitterness that might have been whiskey, a hint of something dark and intoxicating. I felt the scrape of his stubble against my skin, a rough, exhilarating friction, the surprising pressure of his lips demanding a response I wasn't sure I wanted to give, yet couldn't deny, a magnetic pull that defied my reason. My hands, still clenched from the tension, fisted in the fabric of his jacket, a desperate attempt to control the situation, to either pull him closer, seeking a strange solace in the chaos, a desperate connection, or to push him away, back into the safe distance we should maintain, the conflicting urges. I wasn't sure which impulse was stronger, which force would ultimately win. The kiss escalated with a frantic urgency, a desperate, almost violent need for contact. Our bodies pressed closer, a desperate seeking of connection against the cold, unyielding brick of the building behind me, the rough texture, a stark contrast to the yielding warmth of his body. Despite the cool night air, a fierce heat began to build between us, an intensity that grew with each ragged breath, each desperate press of lips, each frantic exploration. Sensory details overwhelmed me, blurring the lines between fear and desire. The harsh sound of our combined breathing, ragged and uneven, filled the silence, a primal rhythm that echoed the frantic beat of my heart. The rough slide of his hand as it moved from my arm to the small of my back, pressing me closer, molding my body against his, the possessive tangle of his other hand in my hair, pulling my head back, exposing the vulnerable curve of my neck, the sensation both terrifying and exhilarating. My own responses were a confusing mix of yielding moans and involuntary gasps, a desperate seeking and a fearful resistance all at once, a dangerous push and pull. It wasn't about tenderness or affection. It was raw emotion finding a physical outlet, a desperate, consuming passion born from fear, anger, and a terrifying, undeniable attraction, a dangerous dance on the edge of oblivion. A whirlwind of sensations engulfed me, a chaotic symphony of touch, taste, the dizzying lack of control, the sheer physical release that shuddered through me, the dangerous pleasure that was inextricably intertwined with the very real fear of our situation, the adrenaline spiking through my veins. The burn was overwhelming, a wildfire consuming rational thought, reducing everything to the frantic press of lips, the desperate tangle of limbs, the ragged sound of our breathing, the primal urgency of our bodies. It was a surrender, a terrifying yielding to the chaotic energy that had sparked between us, a physical culmination of the tension that had been building with every stolen glance, every whispered word, every forbidden thought. The world outside this small, charged space ceased to exist, fading into a blur of shadows and muted sounds. There was only him, his touch, and the dangerous, exhilarating fire that had ignited between us, threatening to consume us both. His hands found the hem of my shirt, inching upwards, the fabric sliding against my skin. A slow, deliberate caress that sent shivers of anticipation through me. I arched into his touch, a desperate need for more, for something that would erase the fear and uncertainty that had plagued me all night. His lips left mine, trailing a hot path down my neck, the scrape of his stubble a delicious torment. I gasped, my head falling back, surrendering to the overwhelming sensations. But then, a flicker of something, a sound, a memory, a moment of clarity, pierced through the haze of passion. A cold wave of reality crashed over me, a brutal reminder of the danger we were in, the consequences that awaited us if we were caught. I stiffened, a tremor of fear replacing the heat of desire. I pushed against his chest, my hands finding purchase against the solid muscle, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Wait," I managed to gasp, my voice hoarse and trembling, barely audible above the frantic beat of my heart. "We can't. The words trailed off, the impossibility of our situation, a suffocating weight. The sudden cessation of contact was jarring, like plunging into ice water after being consumed by fire, the abrupt withdrawal leaving a hollow ache in its wake. He wrenched back, or maybe I did, I couldn't even be sure, the boundaries between us blurred by the intensity of the encounter. All I knew was that the intense connection was broken, leaving a void that ached with its absence, a chilling reminder of what we had almost done. Breathless, shaken, I stumbled back, my hair falling into my eyes, obscuring my vision, the world tilting on its axis. My lips felt bruised and swollen, still tingling with the ghost of his touch, a lingering heat that belied the sudden chill of the night air, a phantom sensation that both haunted and tantalized me. The charged silence between us was thick with unspoken words, with raw, exposed emotion, the air heavy with the weight of what had almost happened. Shame washed over me in a suffocating wave, quickly followed by a renewed surge of anger, a desperate attempt to deflect the blame, directed at him, at myself, at the impossible situation we were in, the dangerous game we were playing. What have we done? The question echoed in my mind, a horrified whisper, a chilling premonition of the consequences. The regret was a physical thing, a heavy weight in my chest, a nauseating lurch in my stomach, a cold dread that settled in my bones. A choked sound escaped my throat, a sound that could have been a sob or a curse, a desperate attempt to expel the turmoil within. I fumbled desperately for my keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grasp the cold metal slick against my trembling fingers. Finally, I managed to unlock the door, practically falling inside the lobby, a desperate retreat into the only sanctuary I had left. I slammed the door shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sudden silence, a brutal punctuation mark on the night's events. Our eyes briefly made contact through the glass before I turned and raced up the stairs. When I made it to my apartment, I leaned against the cool wood of the door. I felt the frantic pounding of my heart slowly begin to subside, replaced by a trembling that shook my entire body, a physical manifestation of the aftershock. It was the lingering echoes of the burn, the taste of him still lingering on my lips. The imprint of his touch remained, a phantom sensation that both terrified and intrigued me, a dangerous allure that threatened to pull me back into the fire. The darkness of my apartment pressed in on me, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere outside. I stood for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The frantic beat of my heart gradually slowed, replaced by a dull, heavy thud that echoed the turmoil in my chest. The silence within my four walls was deafening, amplifying the chaotic symphony of sensations that still reverberated through my body. The touch of his lips, the heat of his hands, the lingering scent of him clinging to my clothes. I closed my eyes, and the image of his face, contorted with a mixture of desire and something akin to desperation, flashed behind my eyelids. A shiver, not entirely unpleasant, traced its way down my spine. What had just happened? The near consummation felt like a precipice I'd almost tumbled over, a point of no return that had been narrowly avoided. The relief at stopping warred with a confusing sense of loss, a dangerous curiosity about what might have been. I pushed myself away from the door, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. The familiar objects in my living room, the worn armchair, the stack of books on the coffee table, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the window, seemed alien, disconnected from the raw intensity of the encounter outside. I moved like a ghost through my own space, the echoes of his touch still vivid on my skin, the memory of his hands on my body, the possessive grip, the way he'd explored my curves, sent a fresh wave of heat through me, a flush rising on my neck and chest. The internal argument resumed, a frantic whisper in the silence. How could I have let it go that far? The danger, the potential consequences, they should have been enough to stop me. But in that moment, caught in the storm of fear and a terrifying, undeniable attraction, reason had seemed to falter, desire threatening to eclipse everything. The events of the night had stirred the already murky waters of my life, muddying the carefully drawn lines between Elena and the woman I became at Nocturne. Julian's presence had blurred those boundaries, his gaze stripping away the performance, seeing something beneath the carefully constructed allure. The thought was both terrifying and, strangely, liberating. But a cold dread settled in my stomach, a familiar weight that had become a constant companion. I had to protect myself, protect my secret. And somehow, I had to make Julian understand he couldn't help me. The memory of his concern warred with the memory of his intrusion. A confusing dichotomy that made it impossible to categorize him, to understand his motives. Sleep was a distant luxury. My mind raced, replaying the night's events, dissecting every word, every gesture, every stolen glance. Why had he come to Nocturne? Was it truly concern? Or was there something else? Something more calculating, lurking beneath the surface? His questions in his office, his persistent interest, it all felt different now, colored by the intensity of our encounter on my doorstep. Had he been investigating me all along? Was his concern a guise? I moved to the window, drawn by the faint glow of the city lights. The cool glass against my forehead offered a small measure of comfort. I took a deep breath, and a faint scent, clinging to my clothes, assaulted my senses. The lingering, smoky aroma of Nocturne, now subtly mixed with Julian's own clean musk. The combination was unexpectedly potent, a visceral reminder of our intertwined presence, the almost intimacy of our encounter. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a confusing blend of revulsion and a dangerous, undeniable attraction. The scent was a tangible link to him, a reminder of the precarious edge we had stood on. The first pale light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gray and soft pink. The city outside began to stir, the distant sounds of traffic a muted hum. But within the confines of my apartment, time seemed suspended, trapped in the aftermath of the night's tumultuous events. Exhaustion finally began to claim me, a heavy weight pulling at my eyelids. But sleep felt impossible, haunted by the image of his face, the memory of his touch, the lingering scent of him. I knew one thing with a chilling certainty. Last night had changed everything. The carefully constructed walls between my two worlds had been breached. And the man who had done it was now a dangerous, undeniable presence in my life. The dangerous liaison was now undeniable. A line crossed that could never be uncrossed. A Pandora's box opened, and its contents unleashed.